I thought I had Alzheimer's. The vetiver notes I crafted suddenly smelled like rotting meat. My son planned to sell our $200 million perfume empire while I rotted in a home. He thought my nose was dead. He was wrong. Only his greed stank. What the maid found in the kitchen was a death sentence for the love I trusted for 40 years. Comment your location below, because this lesson might save your life. My name is James Brown. At 68 years old, I was supposed to be a legend, the nose behind Orem Olfactory, a man whose sense of smell was insured for $50 million. Instead, I sat in a booth at Le Jardin, one of the most expensive restaurants in New York City, feeling like a decaying relic. The air conditioning hummed a low, expensive note, and the crystal glasses on the table caught the light in a way that was meant to dazzle, but all I could focus on was the smell. It should have been a symphony of aromas. We were in a private dining room surrounded by velvet drapes and fresh orchids. But to me, the world had twisted into something rancid. The orchids did not smell like flowers. They smelled like stagnant pond water. The leather of the booth did not smell like cured hide. It smelled like burning rubber. And the truffle soup that the waiter had just placed in front of me, a dish that cost more than most people earned in a week, did not smell of the rich, earthy forest floor. It smelled violently aggressively of wet garbage left out in the summer sun. "Eat up, Dad," Marcus said, his voice smooth and polished, like a stone that had been tumbled in a river of old money. "It is the chef's special. White truffles flown in this morning." I looked at my son. Marcus was 40 years old, handsome in the way a shark is handsome, sleek, predatory, and constantly moving. He wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, the kind of tailoring that whispered power. Beside him sat Victoria, his wife, and my daughter-in-law. She was draped in emerald silk that clung to her too tightly, her neck heavy with gold chains that I recognized as family heirlooms she had borrowed from my late wife's collection and never returned. "It smells off," I murmured, pushing the bowl away slightly. The nausea rolled in my stomach, a cold, greasy wave. "It smells like rot, Marcus." Victoria let out a small, tinkling laugh that sounded like glass breaking. She reached over and patted Marcus's hand. Her nails painted a blood red that made me flinch. "Oh, James," she said, her tone dripping with a pity that felt rehearsed. "The soup is divine. I can smell it from here. It is earthy and rich. Maybe your nose is playing tricks on you again. The doctor did warn us about this progression." Marcus nodded solemnly, his face arranging itself into a mask of deep filial concern. "Victoria is right, Dad. Doctor. Sterling said sensory distortion is a classic symptom of the neurodegenerative decline we discussed. It is age-related. Your brain is misinterpreting signals. It is not the soup. It is you. It is you." Those 3 words had become the soundtrack of my life for the past 6 months. It is you who is forgetting things. It is you who is shaking. It is you who cannot smell the difference between a rose and a dead rat. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Not a violent shake, but a subtle rhythmic tremor that made it hard to hold a spoon without clinking it against the china. I hid them in my lap, clenching my fists until the knuckles turned white. I was James Brown. I had built Orem Olfactory from a basement lab into a $200 million global empire. I could distinguish between Haitian vetiver and Javanese vetiver blindfolded. I could tell you the harvest year of a jasmine absolute just by the viscosity. And now I was being told that my life's work, my very identity, was dissolving because my brain was rotting inside my skull. "I am not hungry," I said, my voice sounding older and weaker than I wanted it to. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on the white tablecloth. The candlelight flickered in his eyes, making them look hollow. "Dad, we need to be realistic. This episode tonight is just more proof. You cannot run the company like this. The board is worried. The shareholders are whispering. If word gets out that the golden nose of Orem can't stand the smell of truffle soup, the stock will plummet." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air like smoke. "I have the papers ready for Friday," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "The full power of attorney. You sign the operations over to me just for now. Just until you get better. You go to the retreat in Switzerland. You rest. You heal. Let me carry the burden. I am your son. Let me do this for you. Friday, 2 days away." The deadline hung over me like a guillotine blade. I looked at him, searching for the boy I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy who used to sit on my lap in the lab and ask to smell the vanilla beans. But that boy was gone. In his place was this stranger, with dollar signs behind his eyes. "I built Orem," I whispered. "It is not just a business, Marcus. It is my life." "And your life is falling apart, James." Victoria snapped, then covered her mouth as if shocked by her own outburst. She lowered her voice. "We just want you to be safe. We do not want you to embarrass yourself or destroy the legacy." I looked at the soup again. The smell of rotting meat was so strong, I had to breathe through my mouth. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was losing my mind. The tremors, the nausea, the phantom smells. It fit the diagnosis. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, a cocktail of geriatric failures. "I will think about it," I said, signaling the waiter to take the plate away. "Let us just finish this meal." The rest of the dinner was a blur of nausea and forced conversation. I watched them eat, watched their mouths move, watched the wine disappear from their glasses. I drank only water, afraid that even the vintage Cabernet would taste like vinegar. When the check finally came, Marcus grabbed it with a flourish, using the corporate card, my corporate card. We walked out to the valet stand. The night air should have been crisp and clean, but to me it smelled of exhaust and sulfur. My driver was waiting. Marcus hugged me, a stiff, performative embrace. "Think about Friday, Dad," he said close to my ear. "Do the right thing. For the family." I nodded, numb, and climbed into the back of my town car. The door closed, shutting out the noise of the city. I leaned my head back against the leather seat and closed my eyes, exhausted. The car began to pull away, then I realized it. My hand went to my jacket pocket. Empty. I patted the other pocket. Empty. My chest tightened. My pipe. It was a briar-wood pipe, polished by decades of use, the last gift Catherine had given me, before the cancer took her 10 years ago. I did not smoke it anymore, but I carried it everywhere. It was my talisman, my connection to her. I must have left it on the table when I stood up to leave. "Stop the car," I rasped. The driver, a new man Marcus had hired last week, looked in the rearview mirror. "Sir." I said, "Stop the car. Turn around. I left something at the restaurant." "Mr. Marcus gave strict instructions to take you straight home, sir. He said you were tired." "I am not a prisoner." I shouted, the sudden anger, surprising even me. "Turn this damn car around or you are fired before we hit the next traffic light." The driver hesitated, then sighed and spun the wheel. We were only 2 blocks away. When we pulled back up to Le Jardin, I didn't wait for him to open the door. I scrambled out, my legs feeling heavy and uncooperative. "Wait here," I commanded. I didn't go through the front entrance. I didn't want the maitre d' to see me stumbling back in like a confused old man confirming Marcus's narrative. I knew this building. I had dined here for 30 years. There was a side entrance near the kitchens that led directly to the private dining corridor. It would be faster and more discreet. I walked down the narrow alleyway alongside the restaurant. The smell here was actually better than inside the cold stone, and damp brick felt real, unlike the cloying, distorted sense of the dining room. I reached the service door. It was propped open slightly for a smoke break. I slipped inside. The corridor was dim, lined with shelves of linens and cleaning supplies. I could hear the clatter of the main kitchen far off to the left, the shouting of chefs, the hiss of pans. I turned right, heading toward the private rooms. Suddenly, A hand shot out from a dark alcove and grabbed my arm. I gasped, nearly losing my balance. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned to see a woman in a gray cleaning uniform, her face pale and wide with terror. It was Elena. I recognized her. She had been a cleaner at the restaurant for years. I had tipped her $100 last Christmas because I saw her crying in the hallway about her daughter's tuition. "Mr. Brown," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Shh, please." "Elena." I pulled my arm back, confused. "What are you doing? I just need to get my pipe." "No," she whispered, looking frantically down the hallway. "You cannot go back in there. They are still there." "Who, Marcus and Victoria?" "They left." "They came back," she said. "They are in the manager's office. But that is not why I stopped you. Come, quickly." She pulled me toward a small storage closet, the kind used for mops and buckets. It smelled of bleach and wet cotton. Before I could protest, she shoved me inside and locked the door behind us. The space was cramped, lit only by the glowing screen of a tablet she held in her shaking hands. "Elena, open this door," I said, my voice stern. "I am not in the mood for games." "Do not scream," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, Mr. Brown. You were good to me. You helped my daughter. I cannot let them do this to you. You need to see this." She held up the tablet. It was displaying a live feed, but she tapped the screen with a trembling finger to play a recorded clip. The timestamp was from 1 hour ago. "I cleaned the private kitchen," she explained rapidly, her accent thick with fear. "The one Mr. Marcus rented for your dinner preparation. He said he wanted a special chef. But there was no special chef, just him. I thought it was strange, so I put my phone behind the spice rack to record. I wanted to see if they were stealing wine, but look." I looked at the small screen. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. It showed the stainless steel counter of the prep kitchen. A pot of soup was simmering on the induction burner. Marcus walked into the frame. He was alone. He looked over his shoulder, checking the door, then reached into his suit pocket. He pulled out a small glass vial. It wasn't a spice jar. It looked industrial, like a chemistry sample. I watched frozen as my son uncapped the vial. He didn't sprinkle it like seasoning. He used a dropper, measuring out precise, careful drops into the soup tureen. 1, 2, 3. Then he leaned over the pot and inhaled. He recoiled, instantly coughing and waving his hand in front of his face. "God, that reeks," he said to the empty room. The audio on Elena's recording was tinny, but his voice was unmistakable. Then, the door in the video opened. Victoria walked in. She was holding a glass of wine. "Is it done?" she asked, leaning against the counter. 3 drops, Marcus said, recapping the vial and hiding it back in his pocket. "Just like the doctor ordered. Or rather, just like the doctor did not order." He turned to Victoria, and a grin spread across his face, a cruel, jagged expression I had never seen before. He held up his hand and let it shake violently, mimicking my tremor. He hunched his shoulders, making a mocking, drooling face. "Oh, the soup smells like garbage, Marcus," he whined, imitating my voice in a pathetic, high-pitched warble. "I can't eat it, my nose is broken." Victoria threw her head back and laughed. It was the same laugh from dinner, but here, stripped of the ambient restaurant noise, it sounded demonic. "He is so pathetic," Victoria said, taking a sip of her wine. "Watching him try to hold a spoon is like watching a toddler learn to eat. Do you think he will sign on Friday?" Marcus stopped his pantomime and straightened his tie. His face went cold and hard. "He will sign. He thinks his brain is dying. He thinks he is becoming a vegetable. By the time he realizes it is just a chemical burn on his olfactory nerves, I will have the power of attorney, and the ChemCorp deal will be closed. We will sell the company, dump him in that facility in upstate New York, and be on a yacht in the Mediterranean by next month." "What if he figures it out?" Victoria asked. Marcus laughed. He is an arrogant old man who trusts his nose more than his brain. And right now, his nose is telling him the world is made of shot. He won't figure out anything. He is already broken. The video ended. Elena lowered the tablet. I stood there in the dark, smelling the bleach and the damp mop. The world didn't spin. I didn't faint. Instead, a sensation of absolute clarity washed over me. It was cold, colder than the grave. My knees gave way, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of the truth crushing my spine. I sank down onto a stack of plastic buckets. My son, my blood, the boy I had carried on my shoulders. He wasn't just impatient for his inheritance. He was poisoning me. He was gaslighting me into believing I was losing my mind, stripping away my dignity piece by piece, laughing about it with that harpy he married, all to sell my legacy for parts. I felt bile rise in my throat. I gagged, covering my mouth with my hand. Elena dropped to her knees beside me. Her hands, rough from years of scrubbing floors, gripped my shoulders. They were warm and solid, the only real things in a world that had suddenly turned into a nightmare. "Mr. Brown," she whispered urgently. "Breathe. You have to breathe." He is poisoning me," I stammered the words, tasting like ash. "My son is killing me." Elena shook her head violently. Her dark eyes locked onto mine, fierce and terrified. "No, Mr. Brown," she said. "If only it was just poison. I watched more videos. I saw what they did after dinner. I saw who came in the back door to meet them." She leaned in closer, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. "This is not just about the money," she whispered. "And this is not just about the company. What I saw in the kitchen after you left. That is the real nightmare. You have to stand up, because if they find us here, we are both dead." Elena's finger swiped across the cracked glass screen of the tablet, skipping forward in the timeline. The timestamp jumped to 40 minutes ago. The angle changed. This was not the prep station anymore. It was the scullery, the deepest, filthiest part of the kitchen, where the dishwashers blasted grease off plates with high-pressure hoses. But the staff was gone. It was just Marcus and a man I did not recognize. The stranger was tall, wearing a cheap leather jacket that squeaked as he moved. He had the complexion of uncooked dough and eyes that darted around the room like cockroaches looking for a dark corner. "Watch," Elena whispered. Her voice was flat dead. "Watch what he does with your life's work." On the screen, Marcus reached into his interior coat pocket again. This time, he did not pull out a vial of poison. He pulled out a crystal flacon. The heavy, diamond-cut glass caught the harsh, fluorescent light of the dish pit. I stopped breathing. I knew that bottle. I knew the weight of it in my hand. It was Aurum No. 1. Aurum No. 1 was not just a perfume. It was the first scent I ever created, the fragrance that launched the empire. It was a blend of jasmine sambac and 50-year-old Mysore sandalwood, a formula so complex and precious that we only produced 500 bottles a year. It retailed for $3,000 an ounce. It was the liquid embodiment of my soul, of the nights I spent laboring in the lab while my wife slept, trying to bottle perfection. Marcus held it up to the light. He looked at it, not with reverence, but with the sneer of a vandal holding a spray paint can. "Is this the stuff?" the stranger asked. His voice was gravelly, like tires rolling over loose stones. "This is it," Marcus replied. "The old man's holy water. He keeps it on his nightstand, sprays it on his pillows, says it helps him sleep because it smells like his dead wife." My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought they might crack. Marcus uncorked the crystal stopper. He held the bottle over the deep industrial sink. The basin was stained with yellow grease and bits of soggy lettuce from the dinner rush. It was a pit of filth. Without a second of hesitation, my son turned his hand over. The golden liquid poured out, my masterpiece, my memories. I watched the precious fluid splash into the grime, swirling with the dirty dishwater, before vanishing down the drain. It was a desecration, It felt as if he were bleeding me dry vein by vein, right there on the screen. "What a waste," the stranger chuckled, though he didn't sound like he meant it. "It is only a waste if it does not work," Marcus said. He shook the last drops from the bottle, flicking them into a bin full of coffee grounds. "Now, give me the mixer." The stranger reached into a duffel bag at his feet and produced a plastic jug without a label. The liquid inside was a pale, sickly yellow. Marcus took it. He placed the empty crystal bottle of Aurum No. 1 into the dirty sink, right on top of a smear of tomato sauce, and began to pour the yellow sludge into my precious flacon. "What is that?" I whispered to Elena in the dark closet. "Is it just water urine?" "Listen," she commanded. On the video, Marcus filled the bottle halfway. Then he reached for a bottle of industrial cleaning solution sitting on the shelf above the sink, a heavy-duty degreaser used to strip carbon off ovens. He added a splash of that. Then, terrifyingly, he pulled a small pipette from his pocket, different from the one he had used for the soup. "Careful with that," the stranger warned, taking a step back. "That is the reactant." "I know what I am doing," Marcus snapped. He dropped precisely 4 beads of clear liquid into the bottle. A small wisp of white smoke curled up from the neck of the crystal flacon before dissipating. Marcus swirled the mixture. He held it up. To the naked eye, it looked exactly like Aurum No. 1. The same golden hue, the same viscosity. "Perfect," Marcus said. He brought the bottle to his nose but kept it a safe distance away, waving his hand to waft the scent. He grimaced. "It smells vaguely of sandalwood thanks to the synthetic masking agent, but underneath that is pure burning rubber." "And the acid?" the stranger asked. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Acid." "Diluted hydrochloric acid mixed with capsicum oleoresin," Marcus recited, sounding like he was reading a grocery list. "And a binding agent that sticks to the mucosa." He corked the bottle, sealing the toxic cocktail inside. "When the old man sprays this on his pillow tonight or dabs it on his wrist," Marcus explained, a calm, professorial tone entering his voice, "he will inhale the vapor. The acid is weak enough that it won't cause immediate bleeding, so no emergency room visits. But it is strong enough to chemically burn the olfactory epithelium, the nerve endings in the upper nose." I clutched my chest. The burning sensation I had felt for months. The way my nose felt raw and dry every morning. The constant low-grade headache behind my eyes. I had told Dr. Sterling about it. He had called it atrophic rhinitis, a symptom of aging. But it wasn't age. "It creates a layer of scar tissue," Marcus continued, admiring his handiwork. "Every time he uses it, he burns the nerves a little more. The scar tissue blocks the receptors. He thinks his brain is failing, but really I am just cauterizing his nose from the inside out. By Friday, he won't be able to smell a skunk spraying him in the face. Permanent necrosis. He will be clinically anosmic and he will believe it is his own body betraying him." "You are a cold bastard, Marcus," the stranger said with a laugh. "I like it." "I am a businessman," Marcus corrected. He wiped the bottle with a dirty rag, smearing grease across the crystal facets, then polished it on his sleeve until it shone again. "He loves this scent so much he uses it 3 times a day. He is literally assisting in his own destruction." I gagged. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The dizziness, the phantom smells. It was all a reaction to the chemical burns. My son wasn't just gaslighting me. He was physically mutilating me. He was burning away the very sense that defined my existence, the gift God had given me, and he was doing it using the vessel of my greatest triumph. But the horror was not over. "Here is your deposit," the stranger said. He heaved a heavy metal briefcase onto the stainless steel prep table. The latches clicked open with a loud snap. Inside, stacked in neat, tight rows, were bundles of $100 bills. It looked like at least $500,000. $500,000 now, the stranger said. $4.5 million more when the trucks leave on Thursday night. Thursday night, Marcus confirmed. The security systems will be down for maintenance. I have already fired the old guard. The path will be clear. And the product? The stranger asked. My buyers in Shanghai are very particular. They want the raw stock, not the finished perfume. They want the bases. You get exactly what we agreed on, Marcus said. The master batch. The 1920 vintage oud. The Mysore sandalwood reserves. The ambergris tincture my grandfather cured. I almost cried out. Elena had to clamp her hand over my mouth to stifle the sound. The master batch. The heart of Aurum. The 1920 oud was not just an ingredient, it was irreplaceable. It was a barrel of agarwood oil that had been aging since before I was born. It was worth more than gold. It was the genetic code of every luxury scent we produced. Without it, Aurum was nothing but colored water. Good, the stranger said, snapping the case shut. My client runs the largest industrial chemical supply chain in Asia. Do you know what they use cheap OUD for? I do not care, Marcus said, shrugging as he took the money. They use it to scent toilet bowl cleaners and insecticide sprays. The stranger grinned, revealing yellow teeth. Masks the smell of the poison. They need a strong base to cover the ammonia. Your family legacy is going to scrub urinals in train stations from Beijing to Bangkok. Marcus laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. Better that than rotting in a cellar while the old man pretends he is still an artist. Money is money. I have 15 million in markers to cover in Vegas. If I do not pay by Monday, they take my kneecaps. I would sell my father's ashes if they were worth anything. Thursday night, the stranger repeated. Midnight. Thursday night, Marcus agreed. By Friday morning, the warehouse will be empty, the old man will sign the company over to Chemcorp, and Aurum Olfactory will cease to exist. It will just be a brand name on a bottle of bleach. The video cut to black. The silence in the broom closet was heavy, suffocating. My stomach lurched violently. It wasn't the smell of the bleach or the mop anymore. It was the sheer, overwhelming stench of the truth. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the plastic bucket, and retched. I heaved until my ribs ached, expelling the water I had drunk at dinner, expelling the bile, trying to expel the knowledge that my own flesh and blood viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to be dissolved. He was going to turn my life's work into toilet cleaner. He was going to sell the 1920 oud, the oil my father had guarded during the Depression, the oil I had saved from the fires in '78 to cover a gambling debt. And he was burning the inside of my nose with acid to do it. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. I was shaking, but this time, it wasn't the tremor of a scared old man. It was the vibration of a machine overloading. Elena handed me a towel. It was cold and damp. I pressed it to my face, letting the chill shock my system back into focus. I am sorry, Mr. Brown, Elena whispered. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were hard as flint. I know this hurts, but you cannot fall apart now. I lowered the towel. In the dim light of the closet, I looked at this woman. She was a cleaner, a nobody in the eyes of men like Marcus. She had risked her job, perhaps her life, to show me this. Why? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why help me? You could have walked away. Because my father was a good man, Elena said simply. And he taught me that evil grows when good people stay quiet. And because... She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, battered bottle of perfume. It was a sample size of Aurum's Spring Rain, a cheap, simple scent we made for department stores, but one I had designed to smell like hope. You gave this to the staff 3 years ago, she said. For Christmas. You shook my hand. You asked about my daughter. You were the only one who ever looked at me and saw a person, not a mop. She put the bottle away and leaned in her face, inches from mine. You have 4 days, Mr. Brown. Today is Monday. The trucks come Thursday night. The meeting is Friday morning. I took a deep breath. The air in the closet was stale, but for the first time in months I could smell it clearly. I could smell the lemon in the floor wax. I could smell the rust on the bucket handle. I could smell the fear radiating off Elena, and beneath it, the steel of her resolve. My nose was not dead. My mind was not gone. I was James Brown, and I was not done yet. "I cannot fight them alone," I said. "Marcus has the security team. He has the doctors. He has the lawyers." "You do not need lawyers," Elena said. "You need the truth, and you need to stop them from taking that oil." "I will," I said. The nausea was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger that settled in my gut like a stone. "I promise you, Elena, I will not just stop them. I will crush them. They want to play with chemicals. Fine. I was mixing volatile compounds before Marcus was even a zygote." I stood up. The closet felt too small for the rage expanding inside me. "Get me out of here," I said. "I have a phone call to make. And then I have to go home and act like a dying man while I prepare their funeral." Elena nodded and reached for the door handle. "Remember," she whispered. "Thursday night. We have to be ready." "We will be," I said. "Now open the door." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times. The sound reverberated through the silent mansion like a funeral toll, but I was not sleeping. I was moving through the shadows of my own home, like a thief, avoiding the creaky floorboards I had memorized over 40 years of pacing. My destination was the basement. Not the wine cellar where Marcus thought he could stash his lies, but the sub-basement, the steel-reinforced room that served as the heart of my creativity, my private laboratory. I keyed in the biometric code. The heavy door hissed open, sealing shut behind me with a reassuring thud. The air here was different. It was scrubbed clean by industrial HEPA filters, maintained at a constant 68 degrees, with 45% humidity. It was the only place in the world that felt safe. I placed the bottle on the stainless steel workbench. It was the gift Marcus had given me for Father's Day 6 months ago. A custom blend, he had said. A tribute to my legacy. I had been touched at the time. I had sprayed it on my pillow every night, breathing it in as I drifted off, thinking my son finally understood the art. Now, looking at the amber liquid under the harsh glare of the halogen task lights, I realized it was not a tribute. It was a weapon. I pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves, the snap of the latex against my wrists, sounding loud in the quiet room. I was no longer the trembling old man from the restaurant. I was James Brown, master perfumer, a chemist who could deconstruct a rose into 300 distinct molecules. "Let us see what you are made of," I whispered. I used a micropipette to draw a singular droplet from the bottle. I injected it into the port of my gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. This machine was the judge, jury, and executioner of the perfume world. It separated complex mixtures into individual chemical components, identifying them by their molecular weight and ionic signature. It did not lie. It did not care about family loyalty or gambling debts. It only cared about chemistry. While the machine hummed, warming up its column, I sat on the stool and stared at the chromatogram on the monitor. My mind raced, but it was a cold, analytical racing. They thought they could fool me. Me. My nose was insured for $50 million by Lloyd's of London. I had spent half a century training my olfactory bulb to detect parts per billion. I could smell the difference between a synthetic aldehyde and a natural citrus peel from across a room. And yet I had fallen for it. Why? Because I trusted the source. I had lowered my guard because the poison came with a hug. The machine beeped. The analysis was complete. I leaned in my eyes, scanning the jagged peaks that represented the chemical profile of the liquid. There were the base notes I expected: ISO E Super, a synthetic woody note used to give volume. A cheap grade of patchouli. But then, the graph spiked violently in a region that should have been empty. Inorganic, I muttered. Volatile. Corrosive. I highlighted the peak and ran it against the chemical library database. The computer crunched the data for 3 seconds before flashing the match in red text: zinc chlorate. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, not of fear, but of recognition. Zinc chlorate was an oxidizer. In high concentrations, it was explosive. In low, diluted doses delivered via a fine mist, it was a potent irritant to the mucous membranes. But that was not all. There was another peak, a heavy molecule hiding behind the masking agents. 4-ethyl-2-methoxyphenol. It was a nerve-blocking agent often used in industrial manufacturing to suppress the gag reflex of workers handling sewage. I sat back, the pieces of the puzzle locking into place with terrifying precision. It was brilliant. Evil, sadistic, but chemically brilliant. The zinc chlorate was creating microburns on my olfactory epithelium, the postage stamp-sized patch of tissue at the top of my nasal cavity where smell actually happens. It was scorching the receptors. Then, the blocking agent was binding to whatever healthy nerves remained, scrambling the signal. It wasn't that I couldn't smell. It was parosmia. My brain was receiving damaged, distorted data. The sweet molecule of a truffle was being twisted by the damaged nerves into the signal for sulfur. The floral scent of an orchid was being reinterpreted as decay. It was a chemical illusion. "I am not sick," I said aloud, the words echoing off the steel walls. "I am not senile. I do not have Alzheimer's." I stood up and walked to the mirror above the emergency eye wash station. The face looking back at me was pale, lined with exhaustion, but the eyes were clear. The fog that had clouded my mind for months, the depression, the self-doubt, the fear that I was losing my identity evaporated instantly. They had not broken my brain. They had just put a filter over my reality. And if it was chemistry that did, this chemistry could undo it. I checked the molecular breakdown again. The zinc chlorate was acidic in reaction. I needed a base to neutralize it. But the nerve blocker was lipid-soluble. It was coating my cells like a layer of grease. I needed a surfactant to strip it away, and a stimulant to shock the dormant nerves back into firing correctly. I moved to the reagent cabinet. My hands, which had been shaking at dinner, were now steady as a surgeon's. I pulled out a beaker and began to mix. 500 milliliters of distilled water, warm to 98 degrees. 2 grams of sodium bicarbonate baking soda to create a mild alkaline solution to neutralize the residual acid. 1 gram of non-iodized sodium chloride to match the body's salinity. And then the catalyst. I reached for a small vial of Mentha arvensis cornmint oil, high menthol content. It was a TRPM8 agonist. It triggered the cold receptors in the nose, forcing the ion channels to open wide. It would be like screaming at a sleeping guard to wake up. I added 3 drops. No more. Any more would cause damage. I stirred the solution until it was crystal clear. It looked like water, but I knew it was a chemical exorcism. I took a modified nasal irrigation bottle and filled it with the warm mixture. I walked back to the sink. This was going to hurt. The membranes inside my nose were raw, burned, and sensitive. Introducing a saline menthol wash would feel like snorting liquid fire. "For the truth," I whispered. I leaned over the sink, tilted my head to the left, and inserted the nozzle into my right nostril. I squeezed the bottle. The agony was instantaneous and blinding. It felt as if I had driven a hot spike into the center of my skull. My knees buckled, and I gripped the edge of the sink so hard I thought I would dent the steel. Tears streamed from my eyes, blinding me. I gagged, coughing, as the liquid flooded my sinuses, forcing its way through the intricate turbinates, washing over the scorched earth of my olfactory bulb. I forced myself to keep squeezing. I had to flush it out. I had to strip away the poison coating my nerves. The liquid poured out of my left nostril, carrying with it mucus, and I hoped the chemical shackles Marcus had placed on me. I switched sides. The pain doubled. My body wanted to recoil, to stop, to protect itself. But I pushed through. I thought of the soup that smelled like garbage. I thought of Marcus laughing in the kitchen. I thought of my wife's picture on the mantel, the one he planned to sell along with the house. I emptied the bottle. I stood there for 5 minutes, gasping for air water dripping from my face, my nose burning with a cold, sharp intensity that felt like a winter storm. I grabbed a towel and buried my face in it, waiting for the shock to subside. Slowly, the burning faded to a dull throb. The menthol cooling sensation took over, opening airways I hadn't realized were swollen shut. I took a breath. At first, there was nothing but the sharp medicinal scent of the mint. But then, as I walked out of the lab and into the hallway leading to the kitchen, something hit me. It was faint. It was bitter. It was acrid. It was the smell of the coffee grounds in the trap of the espresso machine upstairs. To anyone else, it might have been an unpleasant smell, stale burnt coffee beans left over from the morning. But to me, it was a symphony. It was distinct. It had edges. It wasn't rot or garbage. It was coffee. I inhaled deeply, greedily. I could smell the dust on the hallway runner. I could smell the lemon polish Elena had used on the side table. I could smell the faint metallic tang of the copper pipes in the walls. My God. It was back. The world rushed back and vibrant and textured. The gray veil had been lifted. I wasn't just smelling, I was reading the air again. I walked back into the lab and stood before the mirror one last time. My eyes were red-rimmed from the wash. My nose was running and I looked like a man who had gone 10 rounds with a prizefighter. But the pathetic, confused victim was gone. I looked at my reflection. "You are not dying, James," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You were just sleeping." I checked the time. 4:15 in the morning. Marcus thought he was dealing with a senile old man whose brain was rotting. He thought he was maneuvering a pawn. He had no idea that the queen was back on the board. I needed to maintain the illusion. I needed them to believe I was broken until the very last second. If I revealed my recovery now, they would just accelerate their timeline or find a more permanent way to silence me. Number 1. I had to play the part. I had to be the trembling, confused, pitiful father they wanted to see. I wiped my face, smoothing my features into a mask of frailty. I practiced the tremor in my hand, watching it in the mirror until it looked authentic. "They want a senile old man," I whispered, a cold smile touching my lips. "I will give them the performance of a lifetime." I turned off the lights in the lab, leaving the darkness behind me, and headed upstairs to prepare for the role that would save my legacy and destroy my son. The morning sun filtered through the French windows of the breakfast nook, casting long, sharp shadows across the mahogany table. To anyone watching it, was a picturesque scene of domestic wealth. To me, it was a stage, and the curtain had just risen on the second act of my performance. I sat in my usual chair, wrapped in a cashmere cardigan that felt too heavy for the warm room. My hands rested on the table, trembling with a rhythmic, practiced frailty. The air was thick with the scent of roasted Colombian coffee, the salty grease of crisp bacon, and the cloying synthetic sweetness of the perfume Victoria was wearing, a cheap floral assault that she insisted was designer. But my nose now identified instantly as a mass-market knockoff, heavy on the isoamyl acetate. I could smell it all. The world was a riot of olfactory data, sharp and overwhelming after months of dull grayness. I could smell the ozone from the ionizer in the corner. I could smell the slightly damp wool of Marcus's suit. I could even smell the anxiety radiating off him, a sour metallic tang that no amount of expensive cologne could mask. But I had to pretend the world was dead. I reached for my glass of orange juice. My hand hovered over it, shaking violently. I watched Marcus out of the corner of my eye. He was scrolling through his phone, ignoring his eggs. Victoria was picking at a grapefruit, her eyes glued to her own screen. I let my fingers spasm. The crystal glass tipped over. Cold, pulp-heavy juice flooded across the white linen tablecloth, soaking into the fabric and dripping onto the Persian rug. "Oh!" I cried out, a weak, confused sound. "Oh, God! I am sorry, I did not see it." Marcus slammed his phone down. "Jesus, Dad, look what you did." "I am sorry," I stammered, pulling my hands back as if burned. "I was just trying to—" "I cannot smell it, Marcus. I cannot even smell the oranges. It is just water to me. Everything is just water." I looked up at him, widening my eyes to feign panic. "Is it gone forever? The doctor said it might come back, but this morning, nothing. Absolute zero. Marcus exchanged a look with Victoria. It was a fleeting glance lasting less than a second, but I caught it. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. "It is okay, James," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false syrup. She reached over and patted my arm, her long nails digging slightly into the wool. "Do not worry about the rug. The maid will get it. You just need to rest. This is what we were talking about. Your coordination is going." As she leaned in, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and a small, private smile touched her lips before she quickly suppressed it. I followed her gaze. The message notification was visible for a split second. "See you at the hotel at noon. He is clueless." The sender was listed as yoga instructor. I looked away, forcing my face to remain blank. So while my son was busy stealing my company, his wife was busy stealing his dignity. Under different circumstances, I might have felt sorry for Marcus. Today, I just filed the information away. It was another bullet in the chamber. "We have to go," Marcus said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Big day at the office. We are preparing the final audit for Friday." "The audit," I repeated dully. "Right, Friday." "Rest up, Dad," Marcus said, dropping a kiss on the top of my head that felt more like a branding iron. "Do not worry about anything. I am handling it all." They swept out of the room, a whirlwind of ambition and deceit. I waited. I listened to the front door open and close. I listened to the roar of Marcus's Porsche engine starting up in the driveway. I listened to the tires crunching on the gravel as they sped away toward the city. The moment the sound faded, I stopped shaking. I stood up, straightened my spine, and walked to the window. The Porsche was gone. The house was mine. "Elena," I called out. She appeared from the kitchen doorway, a mop in her hand, her eyes watchful. "They are gone," I said. "Keep watch at the front gate. If you see that car coming back or anyone else, buzz the intercom in the study immediately." "Yes, Mr. Brown," she said. "Be careful." I turned and headed for the west wing of the house. This was where the administrative heart of the estate lay. It used to be my office, a room filled with books on botany and vintage distillation equipment. When Marcus took over operations 2 years ago, he had moved me out and remodeled. The door was locked. Naturally. Marcus liked his secrets. He had installed a smart lock, a keypad, that required a 6-digit code. He thought he was clever. He thought he was impenetrable. But Marcus was lazy. He had used the same PIN for his debit card, his gate code, and his phone since he was 18 years old. I punched in his birthday, 6 digits. The light turned green. The lock clicked. I pushed the door open and stepped into the enemy's command center. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and fear. The beautiful oak bookshelves I had installed were gone, replaced by modern glass-fronted cabinets. My vintage desk was replaced by a sleek black monstrosity that looked like a slab of obsidian. I moved quickly. I didn't know how much time I had. Marcus might forget a file and come back. I went to the desk first. The drawers were locked, but a letter opener from the desktop, applied with the right amount of leverage to the cheap lock mechanism, popped the center drawer open with a sharp crack. I began to sift through the papers. At first it was mundane. Invoices for bottle caps, shipping manifests. But as I dug deeper to the back of the drawer underneath a stack of blank letterhead, I found the red file folders. I opened the first one. It was a collection of casino markers, promissory notes, the Venetian Macau, $2 million, the Bellagio Las Vegas, $3 million, the Sapphire Club Underground Unregulated, $5 million. I flipped through them, my hands steady, but my heart racing. The dates went back 3 years. He had been hemorrhaging money. Baccarat, poker, high-stakes sports betting. The totals were staggering. I did the math in my head. $15 million. My son wasn't just in debt, he was owned. These weren't banks he owed. These were organizations that didn't send foreclosure notices. They sent men with baseball bats. The desperation made sense now. He needed a massive injection of liquid cash, and he needed it yesterday. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page, ensuring the dates and signatures were legible. I opened the second folder. This one was thicker bound in a blue plastic cover with the logo of ChemCorp, stamped in silver on the front. Acquisition proposal and asset reallocation strategy. I flipped past the legal jargon to the section titled Brand Utilization. My eyes scanned the text, and I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharp as a heart attack. Post-acquisition, the Aurum trademark will be decoupled from the luxury fragrance division. The high-cost manufacturing of essential oils will cease immediately. The existing inventory of raw materials, see Appendix A vintage stock, will be liquidated to third-party industrial buyers to offset acquisition costs. He was selling the blood of the company to pay for the shell. I read on. The Aurum name will be relicensed for the ChemCorp home hygiene line. Product launches for Q3 include Aurum antibacterial floor gel, Aurum scented pest control spray, and Aurum toilet bowl deodorizer blocks. I lowered the file. I stared at the wall, but all I could see was a can of bug spray with my grandfather's signature on it. They were going to take a name that had been whispered in the royal courts of Europe, a name that signified elegance and artistry, and plaster it on a can of poison used to kill cockroaches in a motel bathroom. It was a desecration. It was worse than murder. Murder kills the man, this would kill the history. Over my dead body, I hissed. I photographed the contract, focusing on the clause where Marcus had already initialed his agreement to these terms. I turned my attention to the safe in the corner of the room. It was a massive steel box hidden behind a generic piece of abstract art that Marcus had bought for $10,000 just to look sophisticated. This was harder. I didn't know the code for this one. It was a newer model digital. I stood in front of it thinking, Marcus was not creative. If the door code was his birthday, what was the safe? I tried his wedding anniversary. Error. I tried his social security number. Error. I tried the date his mother died. Error. I paused. Think like Marcus. What did Marcus care about? He didn't care about family. He didn't care about his wife. He cared about money. He cared about winning. I remembered a conversation from a month ago. He had been bragging about the day he became vice president of sales, the day I had foolishly promoted him. He called it his Ascension Day. October 14th, 2020. I typed in 101420. The mechanism word. The heavy bolts retracted with a solid clunk. I pulled the heavy door open. Inside, there were stacks of petty cash, probably $50,000 or so. There was a passport. And there was a small velvet-lined box, the kind usually used for a watch. I opened the box. Inside, nestled in the black velvet, were 6 vials of clear liquid. They were identical to the one I had seen in the video. The poison. Next to them was a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a prescription. It was a handwritten note on a piece of notepad paper from a motel called The Shady Rest. Mr. Brown, here is the latest batch. I adjusted the pH as requested to increase the mucosal burn rate without causing bleeding. The sensory deprivation should be total within 4 weeks at the current dosage. Do not touch it with your bare skin. Dr. Vile. The name was scrawled in a jagged, aggressive script. Dr. Vile. It sounded like a joke, a comic book villain, but I knew the name. I had heard rumors of a disgraced chemist, a man who used to work for a pharmaceutical giant before he was fired for unethical testing. He was a freelancer now, a man who cooked designer drugs and poisons for the highest bidder. So that was his partner. A man who sold agony in a bottle. I took the box out of the safe. I set it on the desk next to the gambling debts and the contract. I took a wide shot of everything together, the motive, the method, and the weapon. My hands were steady as I snapped the pictures, but inside I was screaming. This was my son's life laid bare. A tapestry of failure, greed, and malice. I put everything back exactly as I found it. The files in the drawer, the box in the safe. I wiped the keypad with my handkerchief to remove fingerprints. I locked the desk. I locked the door. I walked back to the kitchen, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I needed muscle. I needed someone who knew where the bodies were buried, or in this case, where the barrels were being moved. I pulled out my burner phone, a prepaid device I had bought from the gardener that morning for $500 cash. I couldn't use my personal line. Marcus monitored the bill. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 6 months. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Yeah," a gruff voice answered. It sounded suspicious, tired. "Frank," I said. There was a pause. "Who is this?" "It is James. James Brown." Silence stretched on the line. I could hear the background noise of a television, a game show. Frank lived in a small apartment in Queens, now forced into early retirement after Marcus accused him of theft, a lie to get him out of the way. "Mr. Brown," Frank's voice softened, losing its defensive edge. I heard you were sick. I heard you were losing it." "You heard wrong, Frank," I said, my voice sharp and commanding. "I am not sick. I am awake, and I know why you were fired." "Sir, listen, I never took those tools. Marcus, I know," I cut him off. "I know everything. He fired you because you were the only one who checked the inventory logs. He fired you because you were loyal to me, not to him." "He is a snake, sir. I tried to tell you. I know you did. And I didn't listen. I am sorry, Frank." "Water under the bridge, boss. Why are you calling me?" "Because I need my head of security back," I said. "And I need him tonight. I have a job. It is off the books, it is dangerous, and it involves saving the company from being turned into a pesticide factory." "Pesticide?" Frank sounded horrified. "He is selling us out to Chemcorp, Frank. He is selling the 1920 vintage Audi to pay off $15 million in gambling debts." That little... Frank trailed off into a string of profanities that would have made a sailor blush. I waited until he was finished. "Are you in?" I asked. "Just tell me where and when," Frank growled. "Tonight. Meet me at the old packaging warehouse on the east side, the one we shut down in '95. Bring the truck. And Frank, bring the boys, the ones we trust. We are going to move some inventory." "I will be there," Frank said. "And boss?" "Yes." "It is good to hear your voice, the real voice." "It is good to be back, Frank." I hung up the phone and destroyed the SIM card, flushing it down the kitchen sink. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 11 in the morning. I had the evidence. I had the team. Now all I had to do was survive until Thursday night, without letting my son know that the frail old man he was tormenting was actually holding a dagger behind his back. The rain was falling hard by the time I pulled my nondescript rental sedan into the lot of the old packaging warehouse on the outskirts of Queens. This building had been the first real factory I bought back in 1985. It was a brick monstrosity, ugly and functional, standing in the shadow of the expressway. We had shuttered it 5 years ago when operations moved to a modern facility in Jersey, but I had never sold the land. It was a relic, much like me. I parked around the back near the rusted loading dock where the security lights had long since burned out. Another car was already there, a battered Ford pickup truck that I recognized immediately. Frank. I stepped out into the rain, pulling my collar up. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and a beam of flashlight cut through the darkness. "Boss," a voice called out. It was rough like sandpaper on concrete. "It is me, Frank," I said. I walked into the cavernous space. The air inside was stale, smelling of wet cardboard dust, and the faint, lingering ghost of lavender oil that had seeped into the brickwork decades ago. In the center of the room, illuminated by a portable camping lantern, stood 2 figures. One was Elena. She was still wearing her gray uniform under a cheap raincoat, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked small in this industrial cathedral, but her eyes were steady. The other was Frank. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4", with shoulders that could block a doorway. He had been my head of security for 20 years, a former Marine who had once carried me out of a burning lab when a distillation unit exploded. He looked older now. The 6 months of unemployment had etched deep lines around his mouth, and his gray hair was unkempt. "Frank," I said, stepping into the circle of light. He looked at me, searching my face. He was looking for the senile old man everyone said I had become. He was looking for the tremor, the vacant stare. "You look," Frank started, his voice catching. "I look like I survived," I finished. I reached out and took his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, familiar. "I am sorry I didn't believe you," Frank said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "When Marcus fired me, he said you signed the order. He showed me the paper. It was a forgery, Frank. Or maybe I did sign it when I was too drugged to know my own name. But I am here now." "What did he do to you, James?" Frank asked. The use of my first name was a breach of protocol he had never committed before. But tonight, we were not employer and employee. We were soldiers in a trench. "He poisoned me," I said plainly. "Zinc chlorate, industrial nerve blockers. He has been feeding it to me in my soup, in my wine, in the very air I breathe." Frank stared at me. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. I saw the realization hit him, the horror of a son doing that to a father. This man who had seen combat, who had seen the worst of humanity, looked physically sickened. He tried to kill your nose," Frank asked. "He tried to erase me," I corrected. "He wanted to sell the company to ChemCorp. He needed me out of the way, so he could turn Orem into a factory for toilet bowl cleaner." Frank's face crumbled. Tears, sudden and shocking, welled up in his eyes. He wiped them away angrily with the back of his hand. "I should have stayed," he choked out. "I should have known. I let him push me out. I left you alone with those wolves." "You could not have known," I said gently. "But you are here now. That is what matters." I turned to Elena. "Thank you for coming. Did anyone see you leave?" "No, Mr. Brown," she said softly. "I told the housekeeper I was going to the pharmacy for my daughter. I took the bus." "Good," I looked between them. "We have very little time. Marcus is moving the inventory tomorrow night. Thursday, midnight." "The inventory?" Frank asked, snapping back into professional mode. "You mean the warehouse stock?" "No," I said. "I mean the soul of the company, the master batch." Frank went pale. He knew what that meant. Every employee at Orem knew the legend of the master batch, even if they had never seen it. "The 1920 Oud," Frank whispered. "The grandfather casks." "Everything," I said. "The Oud. The ambergris tincture from 1950. The sandalwood reserves. It is all in the subcellar. Marcus has agreed to sell it to a black market broker as a bonus for the ChemCorp deal. He is using it to pay off his gambling debts." "He cannot do that," Frank growled. That is history. That is illegal." "He does not care about history," Elena spoke up. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the air. "He calls it liquid assets. I heard him on the phone. He said it is just old oil. He said he would flush it down the toilet if it wasn't worth $5 million. Frank clenched his fists. The knuckles cracked like pistol shots. "So, what is the plan?" Frank asked, looking at me. "Do we go in there and break some legs? Because I would love to break some legs, James." "No," I said. "Violence will only get us arrested. And I do not just want to stop him. I want to ruin him. I want him to stand in that boardroom on Friday morning and have nothing to sell but his own incompetence." I walked over to a dusty workbench and unrolled a large blueprint I had brought with me. It was the architectural schematic of the mansion and the attached winery facilities. "Elena," I said, pointing to the kitchen area. "You are the key inside. Marcus does not see you. To him you are furniture. You are a ghost. That is your superpower." Elena nodded. "I understand. I clean, I listen." "Exactly. I need to know exactly when the security grid goes down. Marcus mentioned he disabled the alarms for maintenance. You need to confirm the time. He said midnight, Elena said. But the trucks usually arrive early to stage. 10 o'clock. Okay, I said. Now, Frank, this is where you come in. The subcellar has an external access hatch. It is hidden behind the old grapevine trellis on the north side. My father built it during Prohibition to hide whiskey. Marcus knows it exists, but he thinks the mechanism is rusted shut. He never checked it. And is it rusted shut? Frank asked. No, I smiled grimly. Because I greased it myself 2 years ago. That is our entry point. We are going to steal the barrels. We are going to rescue them, I corrected. We need to move 20 casks, heavy oak, 500 pounds each. We need a team. I have the boys, Frank said immediately. Miller, Johnson, and Kowalski. They were all let go when Marcus downsized security. They hate him almost as much as I do. They will work for free if it means screwing him over. But I assume you are paying double time, I said. And a bonus that will pay off their mortgages when this is over. Done, Frank said. But James, where do we put them? And if Marcus opens the vault and sees it as empty, the deal is off. He will know. That is the trick, I said. He won't see it as empty, because we are not just taking the barrels. We are swapping them. I looked Frank dead in the eye. I need you to find me 20 identical oak barrels, standard 50-gallon drums, weathered. Make them look old. I can get those from the salvage yard in Jersey, Frank said. But what do we fill them with water? No, I said. Water is too clean. Water has no smell. If Marcus or his buyer decides to check the bung, or if there is a leak, water will give it away. It needs to have viscosity. It needs to have a smell that to an untrained nose in a dark room might pass for something organic and earthy. I paused, letting the anger I had suppressed all day bubble up to the surface. My son wants to turn my life's work into waste, I said, my voice hardening. He thinks my perfumes are garbage, so let us give him what he wants. What do you mean? Elena asked, tilting her head. Frank, I said. Do you still know that contact at the municipal waste treatment plant, the one who handles the industrial runoff? Frank's eyes went wide. A slow, wicked grin spread across his face. You mean Vinny the Rat? Frank asked. Yeah, I know him. He handles the sludge processing, the stuff they skim off the top of the septic tanks. Perfect, I said. I want 20 barrels of untreated sewage. Mix it with some industrial chemical runoff, maybe some sulfur, some ammonia. Make it toxic. Make it vile. Make it the foulest substance you can legally transport. You want to fill the master casks with poop water? Frank asked, almost laughing. Not just poop water, Frank, I said, my voice ice cold. I want liquid karma. I want sludge. I want the physical manifestation of Marcus's greed. When those buyers in Shanghai open those barrels, I want them to smell exactly what my son is made of. Elena put a hand over her mouth, her eyes dancing with a mix of shock and delight. That is terrible and wonderful. We swap them out, I continued, tracing the path on the blueprint. We go in through the Prohibition tunnel at 10 o'clock. We haul the real barrels out to your truck. We haul the sewage barrels in. We place them on the racks. We seal them with wax so they look untouched. We dust them with cobwebs. And when Marcus loads them onto the buyer's truck, Frank asked. He will be loading tons of raw sewage, I said. He won't check them. He is too arrogant. He will just count them and sign the paper. This is risky, James, Frank said, leaning over the map. Moving 40 barrels, 20 out, 20 in under 2 hours, in the dark. We have to be silent, I said. Elena, can you ensure the basement door from the house is locked from the inside, so Marcus cannot come down unexpectedly? I can jam the lock, Elena said. I will break a key off in it. I will say it was an accident. He will have to call a locksmith if he wants to get down the stairs. Brilliant, I said. What about the noise? Frank asked. Barrels rolling on stone make noise. We lay down rubber mats, I said. We wrap the hoops in felt. We carry them if we have to. This is the only way, Frank. If that oil leaves the property, Orem is dead. I can rebuild the reputation. I can rebuild the fortune. But I cannot rebuild 100 years of aging. Frank straightened up. He looked at the blueprint, then at me. 48 hours, he said. That is the timeline. Less, I said. The board meeting is Friday morning at 9. The trucks leave Thursday night. We have to be ready to move tomorrow night. You need to source the barrels and the filling by tomorrow afternoon. I will make the calls tonight, Frank said. Vinny owes me a favor. He won't ask questions. He will just be happy someone is paying for sludge. And Elena, I said, turning to her. You need to go back. Be normal. Be invisible. But watch him. If he changes the timeline, if he moves the pickup to an earlier time, you text me the code word. The code word, lavender, I said. If you text me lavender, we abort the tunnel and go to Plan B. What is Plan B? Frank asked. Plan B involves me walking into that house with a shotgun, I said calmly. Let us hope it does not come to that. Frank nodded solemnly. Plan A it is. We stood there for a moment in the silence of the warehouse. The rain hammered against the tin roof, a steady, rhythmic drumming. I looked at these two people, a disgraced security guard and a housekeeper. My army. My alliance. They were not the board of directors. They were not the high society friends who had abandoned me when rumors of my senility started circulating. They were the people who did the work. The people who cleaned the floors and guarded the doors. One more thing, I said. When we get the real barrels out, where do we take them? My garage, Frank said. It is climate controlled. I used to store my cigars there. It is safe, James. Nobody knows where I live except the IRS. Good. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. This is $10,000 in cash. For expenses, bribes, the barrel procurement. Do not use credit cards. Frank took the envelope. He didn't count it. He just shoved it into his jacket. We will be ready, Frank said. You just make sure you can keep up the act for 2 more days. Do not let him see the fire in your eyes, boss. Oh, he won't see it, I said, thinking of the mirror in my lab. He will only see a tired, broken old man until the moment the trap snaps shut. Go home, Mr. Brown, Elena said gently. You need to sleep. You have to look exhausted tomorrow. I do not need to act exhausted, Elena, I said, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on my bones. I am exhausted, but I will sleep when I am dead, and I do not plan on dying this week. I walked back to my car, the sound of their breathing behind me, giving me strength. I had spent 40 years building a business on the idea that scent could evoke memory, emotion, and desire. But as I drove away from that warehouse through the rainy streets of Queens, I realized that the strongest scent in the world wasn't oud, or rose, or jasmine. It was the scent of loyalty. And unlike the poison my son was feeding me, it was the only thing keeping me alive. The clock was ticking. 48 hours. I drove back to the mansion, the belly of the beast ready to wait. Wednesday crawled by with the agonizing slowness of a fever dream. To the outside world, I was James Brown, the fading patriarch, shuffling through the corridors of his mansion in slippers, muttering to himself. But inside my head, I was a coiled spring, vibrating with tension. I had to maintain the charade for 24 more hours. I had to let them believe they had already won. I spent the afternoon in the sunroom wrapped in a blanket despite the thermostat being set to 75 degrees. Marcus and Victoria were circling me like sharks, sensing blood in the water. They were restless, agitated. The waiting was getting to them too. Victoria walked in around 4 o'clock, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. She was wearing a red dress, that was far too bright for a house that was supposed to be in mourning for its owner's sanity. "James," she said, her voice loud and slow as if speaking to a child. "Do you want some tea or maybe just some water?" I looked up at her, letting my jaw hang slightly loose. I narrowed my eyes, squinting as if trying to recognize a stranger. "Thank you, Buster," I said, giving her a warm, vacant smile. "You are a good boy, Buster. Who is a good boy?" Victoria's face went rigid. Her mouth twitched. "Buster, my golden retriever," I murmured, patting the air as if petting a dog's head. "He died in '98. Best dog I ever had. He had flea bags, though. Terrible breath." I saw Marcus stifle a laugh from the doorway, though his eyes remained cold. Victoria turned a shade of crimson that clashed with her dress. "I am not your dead dog, James," she snapped, her patience fraying. "I am Victoria, your daughter-in-law." "Victoria." I blinked, feigning confusion. No. Victoria is the one who stole the silver. You are Buster." She let out a noise of pure frustration and stormed out of the room. I allowed myself a tiny internal smirk. It was petty, yes, but considering she was conspiring to sell my life's work to a chemical plant, calling her a dog felt like a kindness. Half an hour later, Marcus came in. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He was carrying a leather folder and a heavy fountain pen. He pulled a chair up close to mine, invading my personal space. I could smell him, not just his expensive cologne Santal 33, but the underlying scent of adrenaline and stale tobacco. He had been smoking on the terrace again, a habit he thought he hid from me. "Dad," he said, his voice tight, "we need to practice." "Practice," I echoed, staring at his tie. "Practice for the recital. For the signing, Dad. For Friday." He opened the folder and slammed a piece of paper onto the glass table. It was a draft of the power of attorney. "You need to be able to hold the pen. You need to look capable in front of the board. If you shake too much, the lawyers might get cold feet." He shoved the pen into my hand. It felt heavy cold. "Sign your name," he commanded, "right there on the line." I gripped the pen. I knew I could sign it perfectly if I wanted to. My hands were steady now. The saline menthol rinse I had performed again at dawn had kept my nerves firing correctly. But I let my hand tremble. I let the tremor start in my wrist and travel down to my fingers. I brought the nib to the paper. It scratched violently, tearing through the page. I jerked my hand, sending a jagged line of black ink across the text, ruining the document. "Damn it!" Marcus shouted, snatching the paper away. "Look at this, you are useless." "I am sorry," I whimpered, shrinking back into my chair. "My hand. It will not listen." "Make it listen," Marcus hissed, leaning into my face. His eyes were wild. "You have to do this, old man. You have to sign that paper on Friday or we lose everything. Do you understand everything?" I will try," I stammered. Maybe if I rest." "Rest," Marcus scoffed, standing up and pacing. "That is all you do. You rest and you rot." Just then, Victoria returned. She had composed herself, but her eyes were still hard. She was carrying a silver tray with a single crystal tumbler, filled with a green, frothy liquid. "Time for your tonic, James," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "Dr. Dr. Sterling sent over a new batch. He said it will help with the tremors." I looked at the glass. I didn't need a gas chromatograph to know what was in it. A high dose of the nerve blocker. Maybe a sedative to keep me docile through the night. "It smells green," I said. "It is herbal," Victoria lied. "Drink it up, all of it." She set it on the table and stood there, arms crossed, waiting. Marcus stopped pacing and watched me. They were not going to leave until I drank it. I reached for the glass with my shaking hand. I lifted it to my lips. The smell was pungent, crushed kale masking the metallic tang of zinc and the chemical bite of the blocker. "Look!" I suddenly cried out, pointing past them towards the garden window. "Buster, He is digging up the rose bushes." It was the oldest trick in the book, childish and desperate. But their nerves were so frayed that they both whipped their heads around to look at the window. "What?" Marcus barked. In that split second, I tipped the glass and poured the entire contents into the pot of the large ficus tree, standing next to my chair. I brought the empty glass back to my lips, just as they turned back. "There is no dog, Dad," Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. I swallowed a mouthful of air and made a show of grimacing. "Yuck. Bitter." "Medicine is supposed to be bitter," Victoria said, taking the empty glass from my hand. She looked satisfied. "Good. Now you should sleep. We have a big day tomorrow preparing for Friday." They left me alone. I sat there and watched the ficus tree. It was a healthy plant, 6 feet tall with glossy, dark leaves. I had watered it myself for 10 years. Within an hour, the leaves began to droop. By dinner time, 2 hours later, the glossy green had turned a sickly, yellowish brown. The tips of the leaves were curling up crisp and dead, as if held over a flame. The poison was so potent it was killing a tree in real time. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. That was what they had been pouring into my body for 6 months. It was a miracle I wasn't dead. Later that evening, the house was quiet. The tension was palpable, like static electricity before a storm. I found Marcus in the library. He was drinking scotch, staring at the empty fireplace. I walked in, leaning heavily on my cane. I needed to know. I needed to look him in the eye one last time and see if there was anything left of my son in there. "Marcus," I said softly. He jumped, spilling a little scotch on his hand. "Jesus, don't sneak up on me." "I am sorry," I said. I shuffled further into the room. "I was just thinking. Do you remember the jasmine?" He frowned. "What jasmine?" "When you were 7, I said, letting the memory wash over me. I took you to the fields and grass. It was harvest time. The smell was so thick you could taste it. I taught you how to pinch the white flowers without bruising the petals. You told me it smelled like angels." I looked at him, searching for a flicker of recognition, a softening of the eyes. "You said you wanted to make smells like that forever." Marcus stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "I was 7, Dad," he said, taking a swig of his drink. "I also wanted to be a cowboy and an astronaut. Kids say stupid things." "It was not stupid," I said. "It was pure. You had a nose, Marcus. You had the gift." "The gift," he sneered. "That gift does not pay the bills. Do you know what pays the bills? Leverage, assets, liquidity." He stood up and walked over to me, towering over my hunched form. "Stop living in the past," he said cold. "Nobody cares about the jasmine. Nobody cares about the art. They care about the brand. And right now the brand is dying because you are holding on to it too tight." "I just wanted to create something beautiful," I whispered. "Well, you created a mess," Marcus spat. "But do not worry. I am cleaning it up." He leaned in close, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Just sign the papers on Friday," he said. "Sign them and then you can die. I mean rest. Just rest, Dad. Stop fighting, it is over." He didn't even correct himself with feeling. Sign them and then you can die. It was a slip of the tongue, but it was the most honest thing he had said to me in years. He didn't care if I lived or died as long as the signature was wet on the page. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the arrogance. I saw the hollowness. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not a bone, but a tether. The invisible cord that connects a father to his child, the instinct to protect, to forgive, to hope, it severed. "You are right, Marcus," I said, my voice steady for just a fraction of a second, before I remembered to add the tremor. I am very tired. Go to bed." He dismissed me, turning back to his drink. I walked out of the library. I didn't look back. I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt lighter. The grief was gone. All that was left was business. I went to my study and locked the door. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark waiting. At 10:15, my burner phone buzzed. A single text message from Elena. The guests have arrived. I picked up the tablet Elena had given me. She had linked it to the external security cameras, bypassing the loop Marcus had set up. I watched the screen. A large, unmarked box truck was backing up to the service entrance of the winery, just adjacent to the main house. The headlights were off. The driver was navigating by moonlight. Two men jumped out of the cab. I recognized the man in the leather jacket from the kitchen video, the broker. Then Marcus walked into the frame. He was wearing a dark coat, looking nervously over his shoulder. He gestured to the loading dock. "Open it up," I could see him mouth the words. The roller door to the subcellar opened. My heart began to pound, not with fear, but with anticipation. Marcus thought he was opening a vault of gold. He didn't know that Frank and his team had been in there since 8 o'clock, entering through the Prohibition Tunnel. I switched the camera view to the interior of the cellar. It was dark, but the infrared camera picked up the movement. The barrels were there, 20 of them, stenciled with the year 1920. They looked ancient, covered in dust and cobwebs. But I knew the truth. Those weren't the grandfather casks. Frank had moved the real ones out an hour ago. These barrels sitting innocently on the racks were the ones Frank had trucked in from the waste treatment plant. They were filled with 50 gallons of raw sewage and ammonia, sealed with wax to look like liquid gold. Marcus walked into the cellar. He slapped the side of one of the barrels. "Get them on the truck," he ordered the men. "Careful. These are worth more than your lives." I watched as they began to roll the barrels of sludge toward the lift. Marcus was smiling. He was calculating his payout. He was thinking about the gambling debts he would clear, the freedom he would buy. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. "Goodbye, son," I whispered to the pixelated figure on the screen. I touched the glass, tracing the outline of the man who used to be my boy. "You are not my family anymore," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You are just a competitor, and I am about to put you out of business." I watched until the last barrel was loaded. I watched the truck pull away, disappearing into the night, carrying a payload of filth that my son believed was his salvation. Phase 1 was complete. The legacy was safe. The trap was baited. Now, all that remained was the execution. Friday morning, the boardroom. I turned off the tablet and sat in the silence, listening to the house settle. I closed my eyes and visualized the meeting. I visualized the look on Lawrence Garrett's face, the CEO of ChemCorp, when I opened the bottle. I wasn't James Brown, the victim. I was James Brown, the retribution. I went to my bedroom, lay down on top of the covers, and for the first time in 6 months, I slept without nightmares. The operation began in the bowels of the estate, far below the polished floorboards, where my son paced and plotted. While Marcus was upstairs drinking my scotch and waiting for his smugglers, I was moving through the damp, narrow confines of the Prohibition Tunnel that ran beneath the vineyard. This was a passage my father had dug by hand during the 1920s to hide whiskey barrels from the federal agents. For 50 years, it had been forgotten, a secret documented only in the original architectural blueprints that I kept locked in my private safe. To Marcus, the cellar was just a basement with one door. To me, it was a sieve, and I was about to drain it dry. Frank and his team, Miller Johnson and Kowalski, moved like ghosts in the dim light of their tactical headlamps. They were big men, former security operatives, who knew how to handle weight and silence in equal measure. We had laid down thick rubber mats along the stone floor of the tunnel to dampen the sound of the rolling casks. The air down here was thick with the scent of wet earth limestone and the sharp metallic tang of adrenaline. I watched as Frank leveraged a crowbar under the rim of the first authentic cask. It was a French oak barrel from 1920 filled with the original oud oil that formed the DNA of our entire brand. It weighed nearly 500 pounds. "Easy," Frank hissed, his voice barely a breath. "If you drop this, you do not just lose a fortune. You wake the devil upstairs." Miller and Johnson gripped the sides, their muscles straining against the black t-shirts. With a synchronized grunt, they tilted the barrel onto a custom-made dolly with silent, pneumatic tires. They began to roll it into the mouth of the tunnel, disappearing into the darkness toward Frank's waiting truck, parked a mile away in the dense forest line. Then came the replacement. Kowalski rolled in the decoy barrel. It was a masterpiece of forgery. Frank had sourced 20 vintage oak barrels from a salvage yard weathered and stained to match my collection perfectly. He had even replicated the chalk markings and the wax seals on the bungs. But inside these barrels did not hold the essence of agarwood. "What is the mix, Frank?" I whispered, looking at the decoy. Frank wiped sweat from his forehead and grinned a wolfish expression in the shadows. Vinny came through. "It is a base of untreated sewage sludge from the municipal plant. Thick, heavy viscosity to match the oil. But to get the smell right, we added 5 gallons of industrial ammonia and a concentrated vial of skatole." Skatole. My chemist's mind instantly broke down the compound. 3-methylindole. It was the organic compound that gave feces its strong odor. In low concentrations, it smelled flowery, used in cheap perfumes. In high concentrations, it was the smell of death rot and human waste. "And I added a little surprise," Frank added. "Butyric acid. The smell of vomit. If they crack this open, they are going to wish they were dead." "Perfect," I said. The swap was a grueling ballet of logistics. 1 real barrel out, 1 fake barrel in. Every minute felt like an hour. We had to move 20 barrels. I checked my watch. It was 2 in the morning. We were halfway through. I left the tunnel team to their work and crept up the spiral stone staircase that led to the main cellar door. I needed to ensure the coast was clear. I needed to see what Marcus was doing. I reached the heavy oak door at the top of the stairs. It was cracked open an inch the lockjam Elena had engineered earlier, having done its trick. I peered through the gap. The main cellar was bathed in the harsh yellow light of the sodium bulbs. It was empty for the moment. I slipped inside, moving behind a stack of empty crates. I wanted to inspect the placement of the decoy barrels myself. I ran my hand over the wood of a fake cask Frank had just positioned. It was cold. It felt real. Suddenly, the heavy metal rolling door at the loading dock began to rattle. My heart stopped. The electronic keypad beeped. Marcus. He was coming in early. He wasn't supposed to check the load until the trucks arrived at 3, but his anxiety must have gotten the better of him. I looked around frantically. The spiral staircase was too far. If I ran for it, he would see the movement. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall of shelving on the far side, also too risky. "Open the damn door!" I heard Marcus's muffled voice cursing at the keypad. I spotted the safety locker against the north wall. It was a tall metal cabinet used to store hazmat suits and respirators for chemical spills. It was my only chance. I scrambled toward it, my 68-year-old knees protesting the sudden burst of speed. I yanked the handle, squeezed myself inside among the rubber suits, and pulled the door shut, just as the roller door to the loading dock began to grind upward. I held my breath. The locker was cramped, smelling of old rubber and stale sweat. Through the louvers in the metal door, I had a sliver of a view. Marcus walked in. He was pacing his phone pressed to his ear. He looked manic. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled. He walked right past the locker, where I was hiding so close, I could hear the fabric of his suit rustle. "I do not care about the manifest," Marcus was shouting into the phone. "Just tell the driver to back up. The inventory is ready." He stopped in front of the row of barrels, the barrels that Frank had just swapped. He reached out and slapped the wood of a cask filled with sewage. "Yeah, it is all here," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a greedy purr. "The 1920 vintage. The Holy Grail. Listen to me. I want the wire transfer to hit the offshore account the second the truck leaves the driveway. No delays." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. Probably the broker or the creditor. $50 million, Marcus said. "That clears my debt with the syndicate, and Leaves me enough to buy a controlling stake in the new venture. Yes. The old man, do not worry about him. I clenched my fists in the dark. My fingernails dug into my palms. He is finished. Marcus continued laughing. Friday morning I signed the deal with ChemCorp. We are rebranding immediately. We are going to erase the old brand. Aurum sounds too grandpa, too dusty. We are going to call it New Scent, Mass Market, Volume over Value. He kicked the base of the barrel filled with feces. This old junk, he said. It is just holding us back. I am doing the company a favor. I am flushing the past so we can have a future. Flushing. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He was literally standing next to a barrel of sewage calling my legacy junk, while unknowingly preparing to ship actual junk to his most dangerous creditors. Okay, Marcus said. I see the headlights. The driver is here. I will supervise the loading. Just have the money ready. He hung up the phone and walked toward the loading dock door, waving his arm into the night. Back it up, he yelled. Let's get this garbage out of here. I waited. I had to wait. If I moved now, everything would be ruined. For the next hour, I was trapped in that locker, forced to witness the theft of my own property. But it wasn't theft anymore. It was a magic trick. I watched as the laborers rolled the fake barrels onto the pallets. I watched them wrap the sewage-filled casks in protective shrink wrap. I watched Marcus sign the clipboard, handing over $50 million worth of toxic waste to a violent criminal organization, thinking he was paying off a debt. When the last barrel was loaded, Marcus wiped his hands on his pants. Done, he said to the empty room. Goodbye, Dad. He turned off the lights and walked out, closing the heavy steel door behind him. I waited another 10 minutes in the pitch black, counting my heartbeats. 100. 200. Only when I was absolutely certain he was gone did I push the locker door open. I stumbled out, gasping for air. My legs were cramping, but my mind was razor sharp. I tapped my earpiece. Frank. We are clear, boss. Frank's voice crackled in my ear. The tunnel is sealed. The real barrels are on my truck. We are 10 miles out, heading to Elena's warehouse. He took the bait, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and triumph. He took every single one. Did he check them? No. He was too busy counting his money. Then he is a dead man walking, Frank said, or at least a broke one. We will have the real stock secured in an hour. Elena is waiting for us. Good work, Frank. Go to ground. Do not contact me until Friday morning. Copy that. Get some sleep, James. You have a show to put on. I walked back to the spiral staircase. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. But as I climbed the stairs, I felt a strange lightness. The soul of Aurum was safe. The 1920 Aud was safe. My father's legacy was no longer in this house. It was in a rusted pickup truck driven by a man who understood loyalty better than my own son. I made it back to my bedroom just as the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 4 in the morning. I stripped off my dusty clothes and hid them in the bottom of the hamper. I scrubbed the smell of the tunnel from my hands. I put on my silk pajamas and climbed into bed. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of thump, thump, thump. I stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows of the tree branches dance in the moonlight. The trap was set. The bait was taken. The switch was complete. Marcus thought he had cleared his debt. He thought he had erased me. But all he had done was light the fuse on a bomb that was sitting in the back of a truck, ticking down to the moment his creditors opened those bungs. And on Friday morning at 9 o'clock sharp, I would be the one to detonate it. Checkmate, Marcus, I whispered into the darkness. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see the ruin of my company. I saw the future, and it smelled like victory. Friday morning dawned with a sky the color of bruised slate. The air was heavy, charged with the kind of static that precedes a lightning strike. I woke up at 6 o'clock, not to the sound of an alarm, but to the silence of absolute certainty. Today was the day. I went to my dressing room. Usually, for the past 6 months I had worn cardigans and loose trousers, the uniform of the invalid my son wanted me to be. But today, I reached for the back of the closet. I pulled out the garment bag that held my armor. It was a charcoal gray bespoke suit from Savile Row, tailored for me 10 years ago when I accepted the Lifetime Achievement Award in Grass. It was wool, Super 150S, cool to the touch. I put on a crisp white shirt, the cotton stiff and bright. I tied my tie a Windsor knot, perfect and symmetrical. My hands moved with a fluidity and precision that would have terrified Marcus if he could see me. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back was not the confused geriatric from the dinner table. He was James Brown. He was the founder. He was the nose. I reached for a small, unmarked crystal vial on my dresser. I had blended it late last night in the lab after returning from the warehouse. It was not a commercial scent. It was a weaponized olfactory anchor. I called it Revenge. Top notes of bitter almond and wormwood. Heart notes of cold steel and black pepper. Base notes of burnt oak and leather. I sprayed a single mist onto my pulse points. The scent was sharp, aggressive, and focusing. It smelled like Judgment Day. When I walked into the breakfast room, the silence was instant. Marcus was drinking coffee. Victoria was scrolling on her tablet. They both looked up, and for a moment their jaws went slack. "Dad," Marcus asked, his cup hovering halfway to his mouth. "Why are you dressed like that?" "It is a special day," I said, my voice soft but steady. I allowed a slight tremor to return to my hands as I adjusted my cuffs. The signing. I wanted to look respectful. Victoria let out a short, derisive snort. "You look like you are going to a funeral, James." "Maybe I am," I murmured, looking past her. "Well, try not to drool on the Italian silk," she said, turning back to her screen. "The car is here. We cannot be late. Roberts hates waiting." The drive to the Orem olfactory headquarters was silent. I sat in the back seat, watching the city skyline approach. This building was my cathedral. I had designed the ventilation system myself to ensure that no scent ever lingered too long. Today, it would smell of blood. We arrived at 9. The boardroom was on the top floor, a glass-walled aquarium that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. The sharks were already circling. As I walked in, leaning heavily on Elena's arm, I saw them. The board of directors. Men and women I had made rich. They refused to meet my eyes. They studied their notebooks, their phones, the grain of the wood on the table. They were cowards bought and paid for by Marcus's promises of a quick buyout. And there at the head of the table sat Roberts, the CEO of Chemcorp. He was a man who looked like he was made of putty, soft, pale, and malleable, but with hard, bead-like eyes. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first house, but on him, it looked cheap. "Mr. Brown," Roberts said, not bothering to stand up. "Good of you to join us. We were worried you might not be up for it." "He is fine," Marcus interjected quickly, guiding me to a chair at the far end of the table. "He is having a good day. Aren't you, Dad?" I sat down slowly, letting Elena help me adjust the chair. I looked at Marcus. He was sweating. The adrenaline of the impending deal was leaking out of his pores. "I am here," I said, my voice quavering just enough. Marcus stood up and addressed the room. He looked powerful, confident. He was playing the role of the reluctant successor perfectly. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began. "As you know, this has been a difficult year for the Brown family. My father's health has declined significantly." He pulled a document from his briefcase and slid it across the table to the corporate secretary. "This is the medical evaluation from Dr. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice grave. "It confirms a diagnosis of advanced neurodegenerative sensory loss. My father can no longer distinguish scents. For a company built on the nose of its founder, this is a fatal liability." A murmur went around the room. Heads nodded in performative sympathy. "Therefore," Marcus continued, to protect the shareholders and the legacy of Orem James, has agreed to step down as CEO and transfer full voting rights to me. I have subsequently negotiated a strategic acquisition by ChemCorp that will ensure the financial stability of the brand moving forward." Robert smiled. It was a greasy, predatory smile. He tapped the thick stack of contracts in front of him. "We are very excited to welcome Orem to the ChemCorp family," Robert said. "We have big plans for the diversification of the product line." I knew what that meant. Toilet cleaner, bug spray. "The papers are ready for signature," the lawyer said, uncapping a pen. Marcus picked up the pen and walked over to me. He placed the document in front of me. The lines were blurring in my vision, not because of my eyes, but because of the sheer rage boiling behind them. "Just sign here, Dad," Marcus whispered, pointing to the line. "And then we can go home." I looked at the paper. I looked at the pen. I looked at my son. I reached out and took the pen. My hand shook violently. I brought the tip to the paper. The room held its breath. Then I stopped. I laid the pen down on the table with a soft click. "Before I sign," I said. My voice was quiet, raspy. "I have one request." Marcus stiffened. "Dad, we talked about this. No speeches." "Not a speech," I said. "A tradition." I looked up at the board members, making eye contact with each of them for the first time. "My father founded this company on a principle," I said, letting my voice strengthen slightly. "Every major decision, every new product, every partnership, it must be sealed with a scent. We do not sign with ink. We sign with our noses." Roberts looked annoyed. "We are on a schedule, Mr. Brown." "It will only take a moment," I said. I gestured to Elena. She stepped forward, carrying a small leather-bound case. She placed it on the table in front of me. "I have prepared a final blend," I said. "A commemorative scent. I would like the board and our new partners to evaluate it. If you can tell me what the notes are, I will sign." Marcus laughed nervously. "Dad, this is ridiculous. You cannot even smell it yourself." "Humor an old man," I said. "It is my last act as CEO." I saw the board members exchange glances. They were uncomfortable. They just wanted this over with. "Fine," Robert sighed. "Let us get this over with. What is it, Rose Lavender?" I opened the case. Inside, nestled in black velvet, were 2 crystal flacons. They were identical, unmarked. "2 variations," I said, "for the 2 futures of this company." I picked up the first bottle. I removed the stopper. "This one," I said, "is for Mr. Roberts." Elena took the bottle and walked it down the length of the table. She held it out to the CEO of ChemCorp. Roberts leaned in, sniffing the air theatrically. He said. "Woody, deep, expensive." He looked at Marcus. "Is this the Oud?" "The famous vintage stock," Marcus beamed. "Yes. That is the 1920 Oud base, the one included in the asset transfer." "It is magnificent," Robert said, greedy delight in his eyes. "Earthy, rich. I can smell the profit margins from here." I sat back in my chair. A small, cold smile touched the corners of my lips. "You have a good nose for money, Mr. Roberts," I said, "but not for chemistry." "Excuse me," Roberts asked, affronted. "And you, Marcus?" I turned to my son. "What do you smell?" Marcus took the bottle from Elena. He inhaled deeply, trying to look like the expert he claimed to be. "It is the Oud Dad," he said dismissively. "Sandalwood, agar wood, a hint of vanilla. It is the master batch." "Is it?" I asked. The room went quiet. The tone of my voice had changed. The tremor was gone. The rasp was gone. I was speaking with the resonant baritone of the man who had commanded this room for 40 years. "Dad," Marcus stammered. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the fact," I said, standing up slowly. I pushed the chair back. I did not need Elena's help. I stood straight, my spine rigid, my shoulders square in my Savile Row suit. That you two are the most incompetent judges of character and scent I have ever met. Marcus took a step back, his eyes widening. Dad, sit down. You are having an episode. Oh, I am having an episode, all right, I said. It is called a moment of clarity. I pointed a steady finger at the bottle in Marcus's hand. You say you smell oud. You say you smell sandalwood. Yes, Marcus cried. Everyone does. That, I said, my voice, cutting through the air like a scalpel, is because you are smelling what you want to smell. You are smelling the $50 million you think you stole from me. Stole? Robert stood up. Now see here, Brown, we have a contract. You have nothing, I snapped. Because that bottle, that magnificent scent you just praised, it is not oud. I paused for effect. The silence was absolute. It is recycled sewage water from the Queens Municipal Treatment Plant, I declared, mixed with industrial ammonia and a high concentration of skatol, the chemical compound for fecal matter. What? Roberts gagged, dropping the bottle onto the table. It didn't break, but a splash of liquid hit the polished wood. You heard me, I said. You just inhaled concentrated excrement and called it magnificent. That is how much you know about my business. You are crazy, Marcus shouted. That is the master batch. I loaded it myself. I saw the barrels. You saw what I wanted you to see, I said. You loaded 20 barrels of sludge onto a truck and sent it to your criminal friends. The real master batch is safe. It is miles away from here. That is impossible, Marcus whispered, his face draining of color. Is it? I reached for the second bottle in the case, the one I had kept in front of me. Now, let us try the second scent. I held it up. The liquid inside was clear. This one, I said, locking eyes with my son, is a custom blend. I made it just for you, Marcus. I didn't hand it to Elena. I walked down the length of the table myself, my footsteps heavy and authoritative. I stopped in front of my son. He was trembling now, truly. Trembling, not the fake shake I had perfected. Smell it, I commanded. No, Marcus whispered, shrinking back. Smell it, I roared, thrusting the bottle under his nose. He flinched, inhaling sharply by reflex. His eyes went wide. He coughed. He recognized it instantly. What do you smell, son? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do you smell cherry? Do you smell almonds? Marcus couldn't speak. He was gasping, clutching his throat. Tell them, I shouted. Tell the board what it smells like. It smells like... Marcus choked out. It smells like zinc chlorate, I finished for him. And 4-ethyl-2-methoxyphenol. Does it ring a bell, Marcus? It should. It is the exact same poison you have been putting in my soup for 6 months. The boardroom erupted. Chairs scraped back. The directors gasped. Roberts looked like he was going to vomit. Poison! The corporate lawyer stood up looking horrified. Mr. Brown, these are serious accusations. Accusations? I laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. Elena, show them! Elena stepped forward and connected her tablet to the main projection screen on the wall. The screen flickered to life, and the nightmare began. The high-definition screen on the boardroom wall was usually reserved for quarterly revenue charts and marketing projections. Today, it was broadcasting a crime scene. The footage from Elena's tablet played in crystal-clear resolution. The silence in the room was absolute, broken, only by the hum of the projector and the ragged breathing of my son. On the screen, the timestamp read, Monday 7th, 14 p.m. The setting was the private kitchen of Le Jardin. Every member of the board watched, frozen in their expensive chairs, as Marcus Brown, the man they were about to appoint CEO, pulled the vial from his pocket. They watched him drop the poison into the soup. They watched him laugh. They watched him mock the tremor of the father he claimed to love. That is a deep fake, Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with panic. He scrambled out of his chair, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. That is AI, he generated it. He is trying to frame me. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel, striking a sounding block. "It is a lie," Marcus shouted, turning to Roberts. "Mr. Roberts, you know me. You know I wouldn't—" "Quiet," Roberts hissed. The CEO of Chemcorp was staring at the screen, his face the color of old dough. He wasn't looking at Marcus. He was looking at the video playing now, the second clip. The scene had shifted to the warehouse loading dock. The timestamp was just hours ago. 3 a.m. The audio was crisp. Marcus's voice filled the room. "This old junk, it is just holding us back. I am doing the company a favor. I am flushing the past so we can have a future." Then the camera zoomed in on the barrel he was slapping. The barrel, I had told the board, was filled with sewage. "You see," I said, addressing the room, while standing tall, my cane forgotten on the floor. "My son is a very efficient businessman. He managed to sell the company's most valuable asset, the 1920 vintage Audi, to a black market syndicate to pay off his gambling debts, all while selling the empty shell of the company to you, Mr. Roberts." Gambling debts. The corporate attorney, a woman named Ms. Cheng, stood up, her eyes wide. "What is he talking about?" I reached into the inside pocket of my charcoal suit and pulled out the stack of photos I had taken in Marcus's office. I tossed them onto the mahogany table. They slid across the polished surface like playing cards. $15 million, I said. Owed to the Venetian, the Bellagio, and the Sapphire Club. He was not selling Orem to save it. He was selling it to save his kneecaps. Marcus lunged for the photos, but Frank stepped out from the shadows near the door. He didn't say a word. He just crossed his massive arms and stared Marcus down. Marcus froze. "This is entrapment!" Victoria shrieked. She had been silent until now, shrinking into her chair. Now she stood up, her face twisted in ugly desperation. "I didn't know anything about this. I am just his wife. I am a victim here." "A victim?" I turned my gaze on her. "Elena, play clip number 3. The screen changed again. It was the kitchen again. Victoria, holding a glass of wine. "He is so pathetic. Watching him try to hold a spoon is like watching a toddler learn to eat. Do you think he will sign on Friday?" Victoria's mouth snapped shut. She slumped back into her chair, looking small and defeated. "Now," I said, turning back to Marcus, "about that poison." I picked up the second crystal bottle from the table, the one containing the zinc chlorate solution Marcus had used on me, the one he had refused to smell just moments ago. "You said this was a fake," Marcus stammered, backing away, until his legs hit the edge of the table. "You said you made it up." "I said the Audi was fake," I corrected, my voice cold as liquid nitrogen. This is very real. I analyzed it myself in the lab. Zinc chlorate, industrial nerve agent. It burns the olfactory epithelium. It destroys the ability to taste or smell. It mimics aging. It mimics dementia. I took a step toward him. He scrambled sideways, knocking over a pitcher of water. "Stay away from me," he yelled. "Why?" I asked, holding the bottle up to the light. "It is just medicine, isn't it? That is what you told me. Drink your tonic, Dad. Eat your soup, Dad. If it is safe enough for me to ingest every day for 6 months, surely it is safe for you to smell once." "It burns," Marcus screamed the truth, ripping out of his throat in a moment of pure terror. "It is acid. It burns." "Does it?" I asked. In a sudden fluid motion, I uncorked the bottle and splashed the contents forward. I didn't aim for his eyes. I was not a monster despite what he had turned me into. I aimed for his chest, for the expensive silk tie he had worn to sign away my legacy. The liquid splashed across his shirt, soaking the fabric instantly. The fumes rose up acrid and biting. Marcus screamed, as if I had thrown molten lava. He clawed at his chest, ripping his shirt open buttons, popping and bouncing across the floor. "Get it off! Get it off!" he shrieked, hyperventilating. "I can smell it. It is burning my nose." "You see," I said to the horrified board members. He knows exactly what it is, because he bought it. He administered it. He watched his father fade away day by day, and he laughed. Just then, the silence was shattered by a ringtone. It was Marcus's phone lying on the table where he had dropped it. It buzzed violently against the wood. The caller ID was visible on the large screen, mirrored from his phone. Unknown caller. It rang once, twice. Marcus stared at it, paralyzed. "Answer it," I commanded. I can't," he whispered. "Answer it," I roared. Marcus reached out with a trembling hand and tapped the speaker icon. "Hello," he squeaked. "You dead man walking," a voice exploded from the speaker. It was distorted, guttural, and furious. "We just opened the barrels, Marcus. What is this? What is this filth?" There was a mistake," Marcus stammered, tears streaming down his face. "Mistake," the voice roared. "We have buyers in Shanghai waiting for liquid gold, and you sent us shht literal shet. It smells like a sewer. You think you can play us? We are coming for you, Marcus. We are coming to your house. We are coming to—" Frank reached over and ended the call. The silence that followed was heavy, final. "That," I said calmly, "was the sound of your liquid assets depreciating." Robert stood up, gathering his papers with frantic, jerky movements. I think we are done here. Chemcorp withdraws its offer, immediately. We had no knowledge of this criminality." "Sit down, Roberts," a new voice boomed from the doorway. Everyone turned. Standing there was Detective James Porter of the Economic Crimes Unit, flanked by 4 uniformed officers and 2 agents in windbreakers, emblazoned with FDA, criminal investigations. "Nobody is leaving," Detective Porter said, stepping into the room. "We have the building secured." Frank walked over to the detective and shook his hand. "Right on time, Porter." "You gave us a lot to work with, Frank," Porter said. He looked at me and nodded respectfully. "Mr. Brown, we received the digital evidence package this morning, and the lab results on the soil samples from your potted plants confirmed high levels of zinc chlorate." Porter turned to Marcus, who was now huddled in the corner, shirtless, and sobbing, clutching his chest. "Marcus Brown," Porter said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, corporate fraud, and the trafficking of hazardous substances." 2 officers hauled Marcus to his feet. He didn't fight. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "And Victoria Brown," Porter added, gesturing to the woman who was trying to edge toward the emergency exit. "Accomplice to all charges. Plus we have the text logs between you and the supplier." "No," Victoria screamed as an officer grabbed her wrists. "He made me do it. He said we would be rich. He said the old man was dying anyway, I just wanted the money." "Shut up, Victoria," Marcus yelled back, spittle flying from his mouth. "It was your idea. You said he was taking too long to die. You said to increase the dose." "Take them away," Porter ordered, disgusted. As they dragged Marcus past me, he stopped. He looked at me. His eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a mixture of terror and confusion. He looked at my suit. He looked at my clear eyes. He looked at the father he thought he had defeated. "Dad," he whispered, his voice broken. "Why I am your son." I looked at him. I searched my heart for pity, for sadness, for love. I found the memories, the little boy in the jasmine fields, the teenager, learning to drive the tractor. But those memories belonged to a ghost. The man in front of me was a stranger who had tried to erase my existence. I leaned in close, so only he could hear me. "You wanted the legacy, Marcus?" I asked softly. "You wanted to be a perfumer?" He nodded dumbly, tears tracking through the grime on his face. "I taught you that a great perfume requires 3 things," I said. "Patience, integrity, and balance. And you had none of them." I straightened up and looked him dead in the eye. "I taught you how to create a scent that lingers forever," I said. "But you chose to boke. You chose the stench of greed. And now that is the only smell you will ever be remembered for." "Get him out of my sight," I said to the officers. Marcus sagged in their grip. He began to wail a high, thin sound, like a wounded animal, as they dragged him out of the glass doors and into the hallway. Victoria followed screaming curses at the lawyers who were frantically packing their briefcases. The door closed. The screams faded. I stood alone at the head of the table. The board members were staring at me with a mixture of awe and terror. Roberts was still standing, clutching his briefcase like a shield. "Mr. Brown," Roberts stammered, "I assure you we will cooperate fully. We were victims of his deception as well." "Get out," I said. "Excuse me. Get out of my building," I said. "All of you. All. The deal is dead. Orem is not for sale. Not today. Not ever. And if I see any of you near my property again, I will release the rest of the footage. The parts where you laughed at my senility and planned to turn my factory into a slaughterhouse for my brand." They fled. Like cockroaches, when the lights turn on, they scrambled for the exits. Within 2 minutes, the boardroom was empty. Only Frank and Elena remained. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. The storm clouds were breaking. A shaft of pale sunlight pierced through, illuminating the steel and glass of the skyline. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Frank. "It is over, James," he said quietly. "Yes," I said. I felt the adrenaline leaving my body, replaced by a deep, hollow ache in my bones. "It is over." "You did it," Elena said, stepping up beside me. She handed me my cane. "You saved the soul of the company." "I saved the wine," I corrected myself, thinking of the barrel safe in Frank's garage. "But I lost the vineyard." I looked at the empty chair where Marcus had sat. "He was my son Frank," I whispered. "I buried his mother 10 years ago. Today I buried him. Just not literally." "He buried himself, boss," Frank said firmly. "You just handed him the shovel." I nodded slowly. He was right. But being right didn't make the victory taste any sweeter. It tasted like ash. It tasted like the bitter almond note in the revenge perfume I was wearing. "Come on," I said, turning away from the window. "We have work to do. We have to move the barrels back. We have to hire a new board. And I believe—" I paused, looking at Elena. She was standing there in her simple clothes, her eyes bright with intelligence and loyalty. The woman who had saved my life when my own blood tried to take it. "I believe," I continued, "that the position of vice president is now vacant." Elena's eyes went wide. "Mr. Brown, I am just a cleaner." "No," I said, offering her my arm. "You are the only person in this building with a nose for the truth. And at Orem, that is the only qualification that matters." I walked out of the boardroom flanked by my true family. The air in the hallway was cool and recycled, but to me it smelled fresh. It smelled of a clean slate. It smelled of resilience. The sentencing hearing took place on a Tuesday, exactly 6 months after the day I walked into that boardroom and reclaimed my life. The courtroom in Lower Manhattan was packed. The press had dubbed it the perfume poisoning trial, a headline so lurid it belonged in a grocery store tabloid rather than the Wall Street Journal. But there we were. I sat in the front row, wearing the same charcoal suit I had worn to the board meeting. My hands resting on my cane were perfectly still. Beside me sat Frank, looking uncomfortable in a tie but alert as a hawk, and Elena, who held a notebook in her lap, as if she were ready to take minutes on the proceedings. When the judge read the verdict, the room did not gasp. The evidence was too overwhelming for any suspense. The video of the kitchen, the chemical analysis of the soil, the testimony of Dr. Weil, who had turned state's evidence to save his own skin, revealing a transaction history that linked Marcus directly to the purchase of the toxins. Marcus Brown was sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary, without the possibility of parole, for 15 years. The charges were a laundry list of moral failures, attempted murder, aggravated elder abuse, corporate fraud, and conspiracy to traffic hazardous materials. Victoria received 12 years as an accomplice. As the bailiffs led them away, Marcus stopped. He looked over his shoulder, scanning the crowd until his eyes met mine. He looked older. The prison haircut and the orange jumpsuit had stripped away the veneer of the corporate shark, leaving behind a frightened, hollow man. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps, "I'm sorry," perhaps, "help me." But I simply turned my head away. I did not watch him leave the room. I had already said my goodbyes to my son the night I watched him load sewage onto a truck. The man in the handcuffs was just a stranger who had tried to kill me. Walking out of the courthouse, the air felt different. For the first time in a year, the invisible weight on my chest was gone. People talk about the sadness of seeing your child go to prison, and perhaps I should have felt that. Society tells us a father should be devastated. But I was not devastated. I felt the clean, sharp relief of a surgeon who has successfully removed a malignant tumor. It was a deep, biological exhale. I was safe. My legacy was safe. And the rot had been cut out. The fallout in the business world was swift and brutal, but not for me. Chemcorp withdrew their acquisition offer within an hour of the boardroom showdown, issuing a frantic press release, claiming they were shocked and appalled by the deception. Their stock took a dip, but Aurum olfactory. We soared. The story of the founder fighting back the resurrection of James Brown played well with the public. Sales of our vintage collection tripled overnight. People wanted to buy perfume from the man who was tough enough to drink poison and survive. We were no longer just a luxury brand, we were a symbol of endurance. But a symbol needs a strong foundation, and I knew I could not rebuild the company alone. I needed a team that understood the value of truth over profit. 3 days after the trial, I called Elena into my office. The room had been purged of Marcus's influence. The glass and steel furniture was gone, replaced by warm oak and velvet the way I liked it. Elena stood by the door, clutching her purse. She was still wearing her simple clothes despite the bonus check I had given her that was large enough to buy a house. "Come in, Elena," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. "Please sit." "Mr. Brown," she said softly, "the new cleaning schedule is ready. I wanted to check if—" "I did not call you here to discuss the cleaning schedule," I interrupted gently. "I have hired a new cleaning service. You are done scrubbing floors." She looked panicked for a second. Am I fired?" "Fired?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Elena, you are the only person in this entire company who noticed when the soup smelled wrong. You are the only one who saw the truth when everyone else saw a business deal. You have a nose that cannot be bought." I slid a contract across the desk. "Director of Quality Control," I said. "That is your new title. You will report directly to me. No product leaves this factory, no raw material enters our warehouse without your approval. You are the gatekeeper. You are the nose of conscience." Elena picked up the paper, her hands trembling. She read the salary figure and gasped. "Mr. Brown," she whispered, I do not have a degree in chemistry. I do not know the science." "I can hire 100 chemists," I said firmly. "I can hire 1,000 MBAs, but I cannot hire integrity. I can teach you the science, Elena. I can teach you the difference between an aldehyde and a ketone, but I cannot teach someone to care. You care. That makes you more qualified than anyone else in this building." She looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "I won't let you down." "I know," I said. "Now sign it before I decide to make you vice president instead." Frank was an easier negotiation. I found him in the security booth at the front gate, which he had already reorganized with military precision. "Director of Global Security," I told him, handing him his new badge. "Double your old salary, full benefits. And a lifetime supply of cigars, though. I recommend you do not smoke them near the inventory." Frank looked at the badge, rubbing his thumb over his name. "You sure about this, James? I am an old dog." "Old dogs are the only ones who know how to bite," I said. I want you to build a team, Frank. Men like you. Men who know that loyalty isn't a line item on a spreadsheet. I never want to be surprised in my own house again. You won't be, Frank promised, his face grim. Not while I am breathing. That evening, I went up to the roof of the Orem headquarters. It was a cool autumn night. The city of New York sprawled out below me, a grid of glittering lights stretching to the horizon. The wind whipped at my coat, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. I held a glass of wine in my hand. It was a 1982 Bordeaux, one of the few bottles from my private cellar that Marcus hadn't managed to touch. I lifted it to my nose. I inhaled. Blackcurrant, pencil shavings, wet gravel, violet. It was perfect. I took a sip. The taste was complex, unfolding on my tongue like a story. There was no metallic tang, no chemical burn. Just the pure, honest expression of the grape and the soil. I closed my eyes and let the sensation wash over me. For months, I had lived in a world of gray sensory deprivation, a prisoner in my own body. Now, the world was in Technicolor again. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was the old will, the one Marcus had tried to force me to sign, the one that left everything to him. I had kept a copy as a reminder. I took a silver lighter from my pocket, flicked the wheel, and held the flame to the corner of the paper. The fire caught, instantly curling the edges, turning the legal jargon into black ash. I watched the names burn. Marcus Brown, Victoria Brown, beneficiary, power of attorney. I held it until the heat nipped at my fingertips, then let the burning fragments drift away into the night air. They swirled in the updraft, glowing like fireflies for a brief second, before extinguishing into nothingness. Ashes to ashes, I whispered. I stood there for a long time, looking out at the city, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. It was a strange feeling to be 68 years old and starting over. I had lost my family, but I had found myself. We are raised to believe that family is the ultimate sanctuary. We are told that blood is thicker than water, that the bond between parent and child is sacred and unbreakable. We assume that the people who sit at our dinner table are our natural allies. But that assumption nearly killed me. I realized then that the most dangerous blind spot a person can have is unconditional trust based on biology. My son saw my love not as a gift, but as a weakness to be exploited. He saw my trust not as a bond, but as an open door to rob me blind. I took another sip of wine, the liquid warming my chest. The lesson I learned was a hard one, bought with the currency of betrayal. It is the lesson of self-preservation. Self-preservation is often mistaken for selfishness. People think it means putting yourself above others, hoarding your resources, closing your heart. But that is not it at all. Self-preservation is a responsibility. It is the duty you owe to your own soul, to your own life's work, and to the people who actually depend on you. If I had let Marcus win, if I had let him sign those papers out of a misplaced sense of paternal duty, I would not just have lost my money. I would have destroyed the livelihood of every honest worker at Orem. I would have allowed a legacy of beauty to be turned into a factory of filth. Protecting yourself is protecting the truth. I thought about the young people watching my story or reading about it in the papers. I wanted to tell them this: do not hand over the keys to your kingdom just because someone shares your last name. Do not ignore the instincts that scream at you when something feels wrong, just because the person hurting you is someone you are supposed to love. Loyalty is not inherited. It is earned. Elena earned it when she risked her job to show me the truth. Frank earned it when he worked in the dark to save my barrels. Marcus. He spent his life withdrawing from an account he never deposited into until the balance hit zero. I turned away from the skyline and walked back toward the roof access door. My lab was waiting downstairs. I had one more task to complete. I entered the sanctuary of the laboratory. The lights hummed to life. The air was crisp and filtered. I walked to my workbench where rows of essential oils stood like soldiers in formation. I pulled out a fresh notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote a single word: resilience. This would be my next masterpiece. It would not be a soft scent. It would not be sweet or cloying. It would be the scent of survival. I reached for the oak moss for the strength of the earth that endures the storm. I added a note of sea salt for the tears shed and the ocean that washes things clean. I added a heart of galbanum bitter green and sharp, representing the truth that wakes you up. And finally, a top note of bergamot citrus, bright and piercing, for the new day that always comes after the darkness. I began to mix, drop by drop, measurement by measurement. My hands were steady. My nose was sharp. My heart was full. I was James Brown. I was a father who had lost a son, but I was a man who had won his life back. And as the first test strip of resilience wafted through the air, filling the room with a scent of strength and clarity, I knew that the best chapters of my life were not the ones behind me. They were the ones I was writing right now. The vines in the field would grow back, the grapes would ripen, the wine would flow, and I would be here to taste it all. Thank you for listening to my story. It was a painful journey to recount, but if my experience can help even one person open their eyes to the reality of their own situation, then it was worth it. I am curious to know where in the world you are listening to this story from. Are you in a bustling city like New York or a quiet village on the other side of the globe? Please leave a comment below with your location and let me know your thoughts on my decision to prosecute my own son. Did I do the right thing? If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please subscribe to the channel Bittersweet Revenge. Hit that like button to show your support, and do not forget to press the hype button to help this video reach more people who might need to hear this message. Your support helps us tell the true stories that matter. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and trust your instincts.